November 21st, 1991, Garden Lodge. Brian May arrived that afternoon for what had become, across the preceding weeks, an almost daily ritual, though the specific quality of this particular visit differed, according to Brian's own account across the limited interviews where he has addressed it, from every visit that had preceded it. He has said that Mary Austin met him at the door with an unusual expression, something between exhaustion and quiet anticipation, and told him, before he had even removed his coat, that Freddie had asked specifically for him, by name, and had asked that they be left completely alone once Brian arrived. This was not, according to Brian's account, how their visits typically worked. Freddie's bedroom, during those final weeks, generally holding 2 or 3 people at any given time, Jim Hutton or Peter Freestone, or Mary herself, moving quietly through the room, attending to the small, ongoing tasks that Freddie's care required. A constant, gentle presence that Brian had come to find comforting precisely because it meant he never had to carry the full weight of witnessing Freddie's decline entirely alone. This specific request that everyone leave, that the door be closed, that whatever was about to happen occur without any witness beyond the 2 of them, carried, according to Brian's own description, an immediate and unmistakable significance that made him understand, walking up the stairs toward Freddie's bedroom that afternoon, that this visit would be different from every visit that had come before it. He found Freddie propped against pillows in a configuration that had become standard across those final weeks, the specific arrangement of cushions and support that allowed him to remain semi-upright for the brief periods his body could tolerate it. And Brian has described Freddie's face that particular afternoon as carrying an unusual clarity, similar to the quality Brian had noticed during their final, unusually productive guitar session weeks earlier, a specific focused alertness that seemed to arrive, according to Brian's understanding, not from any improvement in Freddie's actual physical condition, but from some internal decision Freddie had apparently made about exactly what needed to happen during whatever time remained. Freddie gestured for Brian to sit, according to the account, indicating a chair that had been positioned close to the bed, closer than the chairs typically occupied during their more casual visits. And Brian has said that he understood, settling into that specific proximity, that Freddie wanted this conversation conducted at a physical closeness that matched whatever emotional closeness the conversation itself was about to require. The door closed behind Brian, Mary having withdrawn with the same quiet understanding she had extended when delivering Freddie's request downstairs. And Brian has described the specific quality of the silence that followed. The 2 of them alone, in a room that had, across the preceding months, rarely held fewer than 3 people. A silence that stretched, according to his account, for what felt like a considerable period before Freddie finally spoke. "I need to say some things," Freddie said, according to the version of this opening line that Brian has offered with the most consistency across the different interviews where he has discussed this conversation. "And I need you to just listen. Not argue. Not tell me I'm wrong or that there's more time or any of the things you'd normally say. Just listen, because I've been thinking about exactly what I want to say to you, specifically to you, and I don't have the strength to say it more than once." Brian has described his own reaction to this opening as a specific kind of stillness, an immediate understanding that whatever followed required exactly the restraint Freddie had requested. And he has said, across every account he has given, that he did not speak again during the entirety of what followed, except to answer the few direct questions Freddie posed along the way, choosing instead to simply receive whatever Freddie had prepared to offer him during this specific and deliberately isolated conversation. What Freddie said next, according to Brian's account, began not with anything related to the band or to music, subjects that had characterized nearly every other conversation between them across their preceding 20 years of friendship, but with something considerably more personal, in acknowledgement, according to Brian's description, of a specific quality in their friendship that Freddie apparently wanted explicitly named before either man ran out of time to name it. Freddie spoke, according to Brian's account, about the earliest years of their friendship before Queen existed in any recognizable form. The period when they had been simply two young men navigating London's music scene with more ambition than resources. And Brian has said that Freddie's specific focus during this portion of the conversation centered on a quality he attributed to Brian personally, a steadiness that Freddie apparently credited with having anchored him through numerous periods of doubt and difficulty across the decades that followed, periods that Freddie referenced only obliquely without specifying which particular difficulties he meant, though Brian has said, in his own reflection on the conversation, that he understood Freddie to be referencing everything from the band's early commercial struggles through the more recent and considerably more private difficulties of managing his illness. "You never once made me feel like a burden," Brian has quoted Freddie as saying. In the version of this specific line that has appeared most consistently across his various accounts. "Not once, in all these years, not even now, when I know I must be exactly that. I needed you to know, I noticed. I noticed every single time." Brian has described struggling in that specific moment to maintain the silence Freddie had requested. The specific difficulty of receiving this kind of direct gratitude without responding, but he has said he held himself to Freddie's request, understanding that whatever Freddie needed to say required an uninterrupted delivery that any response from Brian, however well-intentioned, might have disrupted. The conversation continued according to Brian's account. Moving next toward a subject Brian has described as considerably more difficult to discuss even in retrospect, Freddie apparently addressing directly, for what Brian has indicated was one of very few times across the entirety of his illness, his own specific fear about the moment of death itself, not the broader philosophical acceptance he had displayed in various other documented conversations. From this period, but something more immediate and more physically specific, a fear Brian has described Freddie articulating with unusual directness precisely because, according to Brian's understanding, Freddie trusted that this particular conversation would remain entirely private, unwitnessed by anyone beyond the two of them, and therefore safe for exactly the kind of unguarded honesty he apparently felt unable to offer in any more public or more witnessed context. Brian has never, across any interview where this conversation has come up, specified the exact content of what Freddie said regarding this particular fear, offering only the general acknowledgement that Freddie spoke about it, that the specific quality of vulnerability in that portion of the conversation exceeded anything Brian had witnessed from him across the entirety of their friendship, and that Brian has carried, in the more than 3 decades since, a specific and protective instinct to keep that particular portion of the conversation permanently private, understanding it as belonging entirely to the trust Freddie had extended in that specific moment rather than to any broader historical record that might eventually claim a right to know its content. Freddie asked Brian, according to the account, a direct question near the middle of the conversation, breaking his own instruction that Brian simply listen in order to pose something Brian has described as requiring an actual answer rather than silent reception, asking whether Brian believed the band's music would still matter to people in 50 years, in 100 years, whether the specific thing they had built together across 2 decades possessed the kind of enduring quality that might genuinely outlast both of their individual lifetimes. Brian has said his answer was immediate and unhesitating, a simple and complete yes, offered without the kind of qualification or modesty that might have characterized a similar answer given in a less emotionally weighted context. And Freddie's response to this answer, according to Brian's account, involved a specific and visible relief. The tension that had characterized much of his expression across the preceding portion of the conversation easing noticeably, as though this particular confirmation, offered by the person Freddie apparently trusted most to assess it honestly, had settled something Freddie had needed settled before he could continue with whatever remained of the conversation he had prepared. The conversation's final portion, according to Brian's account, returned to considerably more practical territory, Freddie offering specific guidance about several matters connected to the band's continued operation. Guidance that Brian has characterized as remarkably clear-headed and organized, given the physical difficulty Freddie was clearly experiencing throughout the entirety of the conversation's roughly 30-minute duration, a duration Brian has confirmed with reasonable consistency across his various accounts, even while declining to specify the conversation's full content. This shift from the deeply personal opening portions of the conversation toward practical guidance in its closing stretch has been characterized by people who have studied the broader pattern of Freddie's final month conversations with various members of his inner circle as consistent with a documented tendency across several similar accounts, Freddie apparently structuring these final significant conversations to move from personal acknowledgement through the most difficult and private emotional territory before concluding with practical matters that allowed both participants a specific and somewhat gentler transition back toward the ordinary business of continuing to exist in the same room together once the conversation's most difficult content had been fully delivered and received. Brian has described the conversation's actual ending as understated. Freddie simply saying that he was tired now, that he had said what he needed to say, and thanking Brian again, briefly, before closing his eyes, a specific and quiet conclusion that Brian has said felt, in the moment, considerably less dramatic than the conversation's middle portions might have suggested was coming. Though he has also said that this understated ending has, across the decades since, come to feel like one of the more significant details of the entire exchange, Freddie apparently understanding exactly how much he had strength remaining for, and concluding the conversation precisely at that limit, rather than pushing beyond it. Brian left Garden Lodge that afternoon, according to his account, in a state he has struggled across every subsequent interview to fully describe, carrying something he understood immediately was permanently significant, while also understanding that its full significance would likely take considerable time, extending well beyond Freddie's actual death 3 days later, to fully process and integrate. He did not discuss the conversation's content with Roger or John in the immediate aftermath, according to every account available, choosing, in a pattern that mirrors similar decisions made by other members of Freddie's inner circle regarding their own private final month exchanges, to hold the conversation privately for an extended period, before eventually offering the limited and carefully bounded public account that exists today, an account that confirms the conversation's occurrence, its general emotional register, and several specific details Brian has apparently decided were appropriate to share, while maintaining permanent and complete discretion regarding the conversation's most private content, particularly Freddie's specific articulated fear regarding the moment of death. Itself, a piece of testimony that Brian has, by every available indication, decided belongs entirely to that closed bedroom door and to the trust Freddie extended when he asked, on the afternoon of November 21st, 1991, that everyone else in the house leave the two of them completely alone. Freddie Mercury died 3 days later, on the 24th of November, and Brian has said, across the interviews where he has addressed this specific timeline, that he has thought often, across more than 3 decades since, about the specific timing of that private conversation, 3 days before the end, close enough that Freddie clearly understood his remaining time was extremely limited, but not so close that the conversation occurred during the final hours when Freddie's capacity for extended, coherent speech had already begun its final decline. This timing, whether deliberately chosen by Freddie or simply a function of when his strength happened to allow for exactly this kind of extended private exchange, has become for Brian part of what makes the conversation feel. In his own words offered across several different interviews, like a specific and deliberate gift, timed precisely to arrive while Freddie still possessed the clarity and strength to say everything he needed to say, in the specific privacy he had requested, to the specific person he had chosen to receive it, 3 days before he would no longer have the opportunity to say anything at all.